Welcome to 10-Minute University. I'm Priscilla Robinson, and today I'll be sharing some information and hopefully motivation to develop a strategy for a Firewise landscape at your home. I hope you're enjoying that second cup of coffee or tea and ready to dive into a topic that's sometimes difficult to face: wildfires. It's scary. But there are some things you can do to reduce your risks. I want to thank my friend Norma Piper for allowing me to include her watercolor, Fire Fear, in this program. She captured the anguish and ominous dread of the approaching wildfire near her home in Estacada, Oregon. Her property has some Firewise qualities. Her home and art studio were spared. This is what we're going to cover today. Develop Firewise strategies for land management at home, understand the characteristics of Firewise plants, and get acquainted with some fire-resistant plants. The first step in reducing exposure to harm from increasingly severe wildfires is to be informed. Oregon and across the US is experiencing historic drought conditions. How can we live more safely in this dynamic fire-prone landscape? As we educate ourselves about the realities of wildfires in the Pacific Northwest, we can take proactive, essential actions that will help make our families, communities, and economies more resilient. Fire is a natural process that's been shaping life and landscapes on Earth for millions of years. It's very possible that the landscape you call home has burned to some extent in the past as a wildland fire. That is, a non-structure fire that occurs in vegetation or natural fuels. To become a wildfire, it becomes a wildfire when it gains momentum and is large, destructive, and spreads quickly over woodland and brush. Homes and surrounding property in the path of a wildland or wildfire become potential fuel. Let's understand a little bit more about fire itself. The fire triangle on the left is a simple way to understand how oxygen, heat, and fuel create a fire. All three factors have to work together. If one of the components can be interrupted or weakened, a fire cannot ignite or be sustained. Oxygen supports chemical processes that allow fuels to burn, release heat, and create smoke and embers. Heat is responsible for igniting, sustaining, and spreading a fire. Fuel is anything that's combustible, but primarily includes vegetation in a wildfire. Everything from needles, grasses, small twigs, to progressively larger fuels like shrubs, branches, live trees, and down trees can be consumed. Sometimes homes and property in the path of a wildfire become fuel and burn. Interrupting one of these components with Firewise landscaping can make a difference. On the right is the fire behavior triangle, and the three legs of the fire behavior triangle are fuels, weather, and topography. In the case of a wildfire, if one of these components is missing, a fire cannot be sustained. Fuels are all living and dead plant materials that can be ignited by a fire. A fuel's composition, including the moisture level, the chemical makeup, and density, determines its degree of flammability. Weather conditions such as wind, temperature, and humidity also contribute to fire behavior. Wind is one of the most important factors because it can bring a fresh supply of oxygen to the fire and pushes the fire towards fuel sources. The temperature of fuel influence its susceptibility to ignition. In general, fuels will ignite more readily at high temperatures than low temperatures. You may be familiar with the term red flag warnings. That is when humidity is low, winds are high, and temperatures are high. Lastly, topography can influence on how a fire behaves. Topography describes land shape. Topographical features can help or hinder the spread of fire. Typically, fire moves more quickly uphill than downhill or on flat terrain. The information in the fire behavior triangle guides us as we try to lower our risk of wildfires at home. So what can we do? The short answer is develop Firewise strategies for land management at home. Two primary factors determine whether a home survives a wildfire. One, the effectiveness of the defensible space around it. Can first responders and firefighters access the property? Two, the structural ignitability of your home and the surrounding property features like plants, trees, decks, fences, and more. The defensible space plus the structural ignitability equals the home ignition zone, also known as the HIZ. The immediate zone, HIZ1, includes the home and 5 feet out from the foundation. The basic Firewise objectives for the HIZ1 is to reduce and remove ignition points near the home. Intermediate zone, HIZ2, includes 5 to 30 feet around your home. And the basic Firewise objective for HIZ2 is prevent the fire from climbing into upper portions of trees or shrubs to keep the home safe. The extended zone, HIZ3, includes 30 to 100 or more feet around your home, depending on your topography. The basic Firewise objective for HIZ3 is reduce the energy of the wildfire and slow its advance to reach buildings. Now let's see how some homeowners are taking action. This property has taken wildfire danger seriously. Observe how they've acted on Firewise objectives to reduce wildfire risk. The immediate zone, shown outlined in red, has no vegetation other than annual baskets or containers and a well-maintained lawn. Take a close look. Do you see firewood stacked against the house? The roof and gutters are clear of dried vegetation, no overgrown shrubs. Hardscape is effectively installed around the perimeter of the house. Think about your house. How well prepared is your home ignition zone 1? The intermediate zone, shown outlined in orange, there's no ladder fuels. Ladder fuels are combustible materials that allows fires to climb from the ground up onto the house. This zone should be lean, clean, and green. Take a good look. This area is lean, not a lot of vegetation planted, no trees or shrubs to provide ladder fuels if a fire were to approach on the ground. This area is clean, no piles of junk, hardscape to provide access 360 degrees around the house. And this area is green. The lawn is well maintained and no dead or dying vegetation. Think about your home. How well prepared is your home ignition zone 2? The extended zone, shown outlined in green, reduce the energy of the heat of the wildfire and slow its advance to reach buildings. This zone becomes larger when slopes are present. Slopes increase flame lengths of fire, and fire travels faster and easier going uphill. Create a clean, discontinuous path of vegetation, making it difficult for the fire to burn directly to buildings. Take a good look at the photo in the area outlined in green. Notice how the density of the mature trees has been thinned, so there are fewer trees or fuel for the fire. The trees are trimmed up 10 feet or more, and the propane tank and firewood shed are located away from the house, deep into HIZ3. For many homeowners, your zones 2 and 3 may actually be located on the adjacent property. In this photo, the road at the top divides home ignition zone 3. So how your neighbor's property is maintained will affect your home in the event of a wildfire. This is a well-prepared home, and I can see that the firefighters would gain easy access. Here's another nice graphic showing an effective defensible space. Are you developing a vision of what needs attention on your property? Structural ignitability. Like the 3 little pigs in this cartoon, the Firewise house on the right has done well reducing wildfire risk. The roofs are made of metal, a class 1 roofing material, and clear of debris to resist flying ember ignition. Did you know that many of the homes lost to wildfires are the result of embers and often not the fire itself? So pay close attention to flammability of structures such as roof, fences, gates, decks, outbuildings, and such as garages, barns, and sheds. Roofs are the most vulnerable in a wildfire due to flying embers. The viable, dangerous embers can travel for miles. Changing flammable building materials to be more fire retardant is going to help. Compare and contrast the Firewise home in the oval to the other home. The property is very overgrown with no gaps between house and vegetation. The home is not being carefully maintained, and cultural practices for the landscape are nil. There's no defensible space or access. The one narrow driveway up the house has overhanging mature trees, a nightmare for fire and rescue vehicles. Look at the roof with the dry plant debris. It's a blanket of kindling. That flying embers would quickly ignite. Gutters along the roof line are filled with dry plant debris. Flames in gutters are a direct pathway for fire to enter the attic and walls of a home. These home ignition zones 1, 2, and 3 are a mess. I think you're getting the picture. Don't be overwhelmed. There are many outstanding worksheets and resources that help you to organize the tasks. So what varieties of vegetation do you want to introduce to your property? What will you look for in Firewise plants? Part of the answer includes understanding the ignitability of vegetation on your property. Let's face it, all plants will burn. There are no fireproof plants. Firewise or fire-resistant plants possess important qualities. High moisture content, which acts as a heat sink, reducing the intensity and spread of fire. Open branching structure on plants reduces density of the plant material, thus the fuel source. And higher levels of fire-resistant chemicals, such as soap, salt, will slow down ignition, possibly slowing down a wildfire. On the other hand, highly flammable plants possess dangerous qualities. Low moisture content, flammable substances such as oils, resins, wax, pitch, and dry, dense understory near the trunk. They ignite more easily and intensify the energy of a wildfire. So here are some Firewise landscaping swap outs that will beautify your property. If you're needing a low creeping shrub, what about autumn amber sumac? Its high moisture makes it Firewise, and its showy foliage will add interest. Get rid of the creeping juniper. In need of a hedge? Try the dwarf mock orange. Its fragrant blooms and glossy foliage are winning combinations, and the high soap content helps to suppress fire ignition. Get rid of the hedge juniper. Looking for a showy perennial? The Walker's Low Catnip has lovely lavender flowers and a high moisture content, plus pollinators love it. Get rid of the Russian sage. Here are some additional swap outs that will improve your Firewise landscaping. Looking for texture in a stunning silvery gray shrub? The salt bush will enhance your garden and reduce fire risk. The high salt content is another ignition suppressant. Get rid of the sagebrush in your yard. Lilacs have long been a favorite plant, but did you know it has a high moisture content and open branching structure? That is Firewise. French broom, once introduced into housing developments as a fast-growing, showy shrub, has become an invasive, highly flammable hazard. Be vigilant to remove this plant. Mature trees in a yard are peaceful. Trees provide shade, privacy, homes for wildlife, and more. Choose wisely which trees to keep and which you thin out. Maple trees have a high moisture and open branching structure, as do fruit trees. But red cedar is a very flammable conifer with high resin levels and a dry understructure. Firewise hardscape with non-flammable materials such as pebbles, cement, pavers, or rocks. It's the way to go in this zone. No vegetation other than annuals like baskets and containers, and a well-maintained lawn. Remove overgrown vegetation that has encroached within the 5 feet of your house. And highly flammable wood chips or wood mulch in this zone is a no-no. It is vulnerable to flying embers and catch fire easily, sending flames into ground level vents or under decks. The Firewise landscape in the oval shows a good use of hardscape. The non-flammable materials such as pebbles and pavers flank both the house and the fence. Proactive cultural practices are evident. Shrubs and trees have been pruned and debris removed. The lawn is mowed and watered. The Firewise landscape in the white frame has island plant groupings. This is a beautiful landscaping strategy that also creates that non-continuous vegetation. It provides clear access onto the property for firefighters. Fire-resistant annuals and perennials with high moisture content like hostas, begonias, and impatient are preferable in this zone. Highly flammable wood chips and mulch within the HIZ2 is still dangerous due to wildfire embers. The threat is compounded by highly flammable plants with resins, such as the creeping juniper on the wood chips. This traditional landscape may look tidy, but the combination will allow the fire to spread, and the juniper fuels the fire energy. Poor cultural practices have allowed shrubs to get out of control and pose a threat. Not only has the volume of fuel increased, but there's no defensible space for the firefighters to access the yard. trees have encroached onto the house in this HIZ2, providing fuel ladders to the roof. Outstanding cultural practices are shown with the thinned and pruned trees. This Firewise practice provides access to the property as well as reduce the amount of fuel in the home ignition zone 3. High moisture content, open branching habits, and deciduous trees are a smart choice. The high moisture trees, especially when they are in leaf, act as a heat sink. When trees are thinned and trimmed up, an advancing fire can burn past the trees rather than becoming fuel. Another fuel source that is often ignored during yard clearing are blackberry bushes and French broom. Invasive plants should be kept out of HIZ3. Don't feed the wildfire. Highly flammable conifers contain resins and dry underbrush. Though they look beautiful with a blanket of snow, the conifers are dangerous and most vulnerable in a wildfire. Debris left on the ground to decompose is a poor cultural practice and a fire hazard. It can catch fire, send flames up into the canopy of trees, thus sending embers high and flames barreling towards a home. The eucalyptus tree, also known as the gum tree, contains flammable oils and should be avoided in a landscape design. It was an interesting process for me to look into urban Firewise preparation. During the Riverside fire in 2020, my home in Happy Valley was under a level 2 evacuation order. Many of my friends in Clackamas County evacuated. Some lost their homes. Urban communities are not immune to wildfires, but there is promise. It was amazing to discover and dive into the many national, state, and community websites dealing with fire prevention and Firewise landscaping. Always look for research-based and credible sources like universities, government agencies, and even master gardeners in your county. One of my biggest takeaways was there's lots of good information and groups trying to get the word out on Firewise. Their goals are to help property owners to prepare and enable neighborhoods to work together. Preparing for wildfires with the cooperations of neighbors, first responders, state and government agencies lowers your risk in a wildfire. When you share an ignition zone with a neighbor, communication and actions are essential. Check out the photo on the right. Some homeowners need a reality check and information when it comes to being Firewise. Remember, all plants will burn, and plant viability in a fire relies on the moisture content, the plant structure, and the chemical makeup. Here I've elaborated on a plant viability chart that I saw on the US Bureau of Land Management. I call it Fire Resistance Hierarchy for Vegetation. Starting with the most fire resistant on the top in green and gradually moving into the least fire resistant in red at the bottom. Some Oregon natives are highlighted with an asterisk. Let's take a look at some of the stunning Firewise plants that will lower your risk in a wildfire. Succulents have a very high moisture content. Colors and textures vary. The sedums on the left in this cement vessel are actually survivors from the Riverside fire in Estacada. They grew back this spring. There are many beautiful Firewise ground covers for sunny and shady locations. A lawn is rarely planted with just one variety of grass seed. Commercial grass seed companies market different combinations based on the use sun exposure, and soil composition. A well-maintained lawn is Firewise. Lots of annuals add pops of color, texture, and beauty to a home landscape. These are perfect for a planter that can sit in your HIZ1 zone. Now, as we get into the yellow range of the chart, plant selection is very important for a Firewise landscape. So please do your research. What plant swap outs are you going to make? When planting shrubs, consider the mature size. That will determine your spacing when putting them in the ground. Remember to provide open areas for access. I love trees that provide spring flowers, calming coolness, fruit in the summer, and vibrant autumn colors. Choosing the right tree for your home is a difficult task. So difficult, we have a whole webinar just on this topic being offered on October 9th. The vegetation in the orange and red on this chart need to be planted on your property with the utmost caution. Ornamental grasses, though showy and relatively easy to maintain, are very flammable and act as kindling. The conifers are the most flammable and dangerous of the mature trees on a property. But here in the Pacific Northwest, the landscape would not be the same without these majestic giants. My research revealed these 3 conifers were the best of the worst flammable trees. Keep the grove trimmed up, trees spaced to avoid overlap, and areas beneath them very clean. This photo on the left was taken by my friend Patty after her home and her daughter's home were destroyed by the 2020 Riverside fire that swept up the wooded slopes in Estacada, Oregon. Here in Clackamas County, the Riverside fire destroyed 150 structures, including 50 homes. Thousands of people living in Clackamas County were affected with property damage, evacuations, and skies darkened with thick caustic smoke. With grace, some home preparations, the bravery of first responders and firefighters, many houses were spared and lives saved. And with grace comes hope that some piece of your home has survived, some plant has resilience to come back, even after a wildfire. This clematis and hostas are evidence. Patty was overwhelmed with joy to observe how many plants emerge from the ashes like the phoenix. There are no guarantees. Making structure and landscape Firewise choices may just reduce your risk of a fire damage. This OSU publication, Fire Resistant Plants for Home Landscapes, is filled with photos, charts, and research-based information to help you select the right plant for your Firewise landscape. It has been recently revised and is a wealth of information. These publications also offer lots of great information and practical worksheets to help you assess your readiness in the event of a wildfire. Thanks for joining us today on 10-Minute University. After we close today, please fill out the evaluation form. Your feedback is crucial. Now we're going to change gears and move into our Master Gardener Q&A. Please type your questions in the question and answer box, and let's welcome Leah, my co-host.
Hi, that was really interesting and a lot of information that I personally need to take into account. We have some questions today. First one is on a graphic, they have the car shown outside of zone 3. Now, this is not a plant-based question, but where should vehicles be placed?
Well, the most important thing if a wildfire is advancing, that you want your car backed up and facing in the direction so that you can leave quickly. So that's the most important thing about your car and location. And I guess if the wildfire is approaching your driveway, then you want to move your car to a location where you will be able to access it. And you probably should be leaving by that at that point.
Okay. Another question we had is compost mulch okay? Mulch is often recommended for soil enhancement and moisture retention. And then as in addition to that question, somebody else asked us, a master gardener, we've been told to use, wood mulch as a weed deterrent. Is this no longer the case? If so, what should we be using instead if you have large areas to cover?
There are a lot of studies on ignitability of wood mulch, and there really are no good pure wood mulches, and that's what we're looking at the chopped up wood.
Mm-hmm.
A compost mulch is going to have a higher moisture content, so that's going to help, but never in that HIZ 1 zone do you want to have wood chips or any kind of mulch. I might deter that question to our master gardeners at the end for specifics of other options. But my research and the evidence points to not using wood mulch as your weed barrier.
I do have a story about that. We have a gravel parking strip in front of our house that gets a lot of weeds in it. And my husband just loves to take the propane torch and torch the weeds, which is fine because they're really hard to pull. But next to that, and then we have a layer of rocks, river rock, and then we have the shredded bark mulch. And he had torched the weeds early in the morning. And at dinner time, I was working at the sink and I looked out my kitchen window and I see smoke. And I thought, well, I don't usually, the neighbors often have a bonfire, but it didn't look like it, didn't smell like it. I walked out and an ember had caught on our shredded bark. And I had a long line of fire going. It was, just smoldering, but it could have taken off. So, it really, ooh. And even though we live in urban areas, I know many people in California who live in neighborhoods that lost everything when fires went through there. So it's not a safe thing necessarily.
Well, it sounded like you had good Firewise landscaping material up in your HIZ 1 and HIZ 2 zone. But just imagine if those wood chips had been right up against the side of your house.
Yeah. Okay. We've got another question here. Are the plants native to this area? So you were having, the plant this, not this.
Oh, there are a lot of native plants. Is that the question? Are there native plants to plant?
Or were all of the plant this native plants, but they weren't. And then are native plants less flammable? Is going native something we shouldn't consider?
Oh, no, natives are a very good option. Like the Oregon grape, our state flower, is a very good plant to have. It has a high moisture content, has open branching, and so it is good. There's a great Metro leaflet on native plants, and native plants are good.
I think a lot of it
depends, are Firewise.
A lot of it depends on the native because, Douglas firs are native plants, but they're highly flammable. And some of the grasses, or at least one of the grasses that you showed, was a native, but highly flammable. So you kind of have to just, I think, take a hard look at what native plant you're thinking about.
And just as a clarification, when I did include those 3 plants from each of the different categories, those were plants that are considered Firewise. So all of those choices in that chart were according to research, preferable over than other things. Like say rosemary. Rosemary is a great plant, but so high in oils and very flammable and super dense understory of dry material.
Another question, I thought I had read that not all eucalyptus species were the same in terms of fire risk. I think the red gum was the real problem versus others. Do you know anything about that?
All eucalyptus trees possess oils, and they have a range on most flammable and least flammable. So I would just, if you really want to plant eucalyptus, I would do your research. I don't have the name of that particular species. That would be most Firewise. My research said don't plant eucalyptus in your landscape.
Do you know if manzanita are considered highly flammable?
Manzanita are considered Firewise. They are getting more into that deep yellow zone on the chart. So you do need to be careful where you plant them. Some plants are only recommended out in the HIZ3 zone so that you do not create any fuel ladder fuels.
I remember when I lived in California, I was surrounded by manzanita and we had massive wildfires, and I took a chainsaw out and just kind of limbed up the area close to the house, took out the manzanita because it just felt safer, you know. But yeah, I agree with you there.
And manzanita is a very dense wood, so it does burn hot once it ignites. And so I think one of the things that I read about manzanita is that because it is such a dense wood, it doesn't catch fire as easily if the area underneath is not a lot of fuel.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
That makes good sense, yeah. Linda's asking if the presentation will be available for later viewing and reference, and yes, it will. It will be on the Master Gardener 10-Minute University website, probably early next week. It takes a few days to get it lined up. And I think that's it for our questions.
Yeah, and I just want to add that I know that this was a really, it's a difficult subject to broach, but I can't emphasize enough that it's really worth it just to make little changes. You may not want that stark landscape like in that big Firewise, you know, the Firewise house that I was demonstrating, but making a few changes can really make a difference. So, you know, think about it, what you can do.
Really good advice. Thank you.
Okay.